Evil Within knows exactly what it is. It's confident and comfortable in what it's trying to do, and while it's not a revolutionary title, I can't help but feel swept up by its silly plot and its dread-inducing nightmarish hospitals and its clunky-ass, dorky-ass detective who has all the stamina of a 50-year-old chain smoker and runs like someone who has just broken both their ankles. Yeah, I don't think that every horror game out there has to move the needle too much. Sometimes I just really want a game that locks in what makes this genre so great, right? Tight locales, horrific environments, intense resource management, and just enough player choice to regret your mistakes, and a disempowered protagonist. Well, somewhat disempowered, we'll talk about that. So Evil Within does all of this, and it does it really, really well. It takes you on this journey through devolving madness every step, fraught with monsters and traps, with only a few tools at your disposal to sneak, scavenge, and blast your way through. And it definitely leans more towards blasting than sneaking or scavenging, as most of the levels have a sort of funnel that leads you to a larger battle or an ambush or a boss fight that demands movement and improvisation and utilization of all your equipment. But there's just enough downtime as you pick your way through these labyrinthine hospitals, which feel uncanny and endless, all chipped tile walls and broken fluorescent lighting, no windows or exits, only impossibly placed ladders and maze-like hallways stocked with murderous creatures that attack you on sight. Sometimes you can get the drop on them and save a few bullets, but full stealth is rarely an option. Look, you're gonna have to lay down some lead, and our hero, Sebastian Castellanos, is a police detective with the experience to do it. Equipped with a suite of weapons, you're never totally disadvantaged, and careful resource management can keep you ready for the tougher or longer fights. It covers all the basics of classic, clearly defined survival horror, right? But that's not to say that it's generic, because it's definitely not. While the overall story might be presented in a way that's kind of bland, there's a big budget cinematic quality to the game. The presentation is fantastic and immersive, and because of the many effects that cover the screen at any given time or the wicked transitions from certain levels, it's consistently exciting to progress through the game just to see what weird thing happens next on screen. There's a good vibe here. And while it's generally a slow burn horror, the gameplay is varied enough that you don't spend too much time doing the same thing. One level might see you sneaking and picking your way through a ruined town, and another might see you defending an ally that's working on your escape, and another still might have you dismantling vicious traps while under the pressure of an unkillable pursuer. There's a lot going on here, and while the game doesn't spend too much time explaining why any of this happens, it's always a good time. But at its core, Evil Within is a classic survival horror where you manage your resources, count your bullets, and try to stay ahead of a horde of monsters that will stop at nothing to eat you for lunch. Okay, so to set the scene, Detective Sebastian and his team, Joseph Oda and Julie Kidman, are dispatched to a brutal killing at a local Beacon mental hospital. Arriving on scene, the team is ambushed and separated, forcing Sebastian into a desperate fight for survival against a myriad of enemies, okay? Cool. Survival horror through and through. You sneak, you scavenge, you shoot. Sebastian is a competent, if a little mundane hero, right? But he's got a sturdy survivability to him, a sort of rugged brooding. Adept with a revolver, shotgun, and rifle, he's got a tool for just about every situation the game puts you in. And you'll be using these things a lot, whether you're sneaking around or fighting off waves of monsters with your team. It all comes down to resource management. The shooting is solid, not sticky enough to feel easy, but tunable enough through upgrades that you feel stronger as the game goes on. The revolver feels strong, and the shotgun explodes heads like melons at close range. It falls off quick, so pull it off when you're backed into a corner to clear a path. The rifle might be the one weapon that feels just a little busted. Steady is all hell and nearly always an instant kill with a headshot. This thing feels great to shoot, and the ammo is appropriately scarce because of that. You get a Magnum towards the end, and while damage-wise it feels great, it almost feels just like the revolver to shoot. It lacks the crackle of gunpowder and the immense recoil that you'd expect, right? And perhaps even worse, the game lacks the encounters for it. By the point that you get it in the story, you've only got a couple of levels left, and they're so action-packed to begin with, it doesn't really offer any environments for it to shine in. It's whatever. Most interesting here is the Agony crossbow, a really sick, if slightly out of place weapon that comes with varied types of bolts, all craftable through traps that you can dismantle or scraps of parts that you can find laying around. You've got the harpoon bolt, this wicked spear that can pin folks to walls and take out smaller enemies easily. You've got flash bolts to conserve resources and then go in for stealth kills. Exploding bolts for AoE clearing and lightning bolts for crowd control or locking down a path. You even have these frost bolts which freeze and explode and I feel are a little redundant. But hey, I can't complain having more tools to survive with, right? So everything plays a role here and you have to make quick decisions of what weapon to use as you go. Environments and encounters change so rapidly here that you can't really settle into a tried and true method, which I'm pretty guilty of in most survival horror games. You might find yourself in a wide open area where one of those lightning bolts may be ineffective, so you opt for the range of the rifle or a tight, dark corridor where it's easier to line up and pick off enemies with the revolver. Or maybe you're being pressured from multiple sides, so you get some distance and lay down traps with the explosive bolt and adopt a kind of hit and run tactic instead of facing down the horde. You can burn bodies as well, and this is mostly used for crowd control. You don't really need to do this outside of a few encounters, but if you can down an enemy right as others are approaching and ignite them with a match, you can wipe them all out and just save wicked amounts of ammo. But the animation here is so long that you have to get the timing just right or you're out of some health. It's a great little mini risk-reward decision that you have to make regularly, and I love it. It really only comes into play on the unlockable higher difficulties when ammo is just like the rarest thing on the planet. And I get that the timing can feel clumsy, but it works for me. Look, at a close level, everything here is pretty janky, right? Sebastian lumbers around and the aiming doesn't feel great and his mobility in close quarters is even worse. But it's that jank that's kind of baked into games like this that heightens that tension. You don't have a dodge or a parry or an ability to shrug off attacks. If it gets hairy like that, it kind of falls apart. I know that's not exactly good game design, but it's sort of what makes these games work. The pace of the combat varies greatly from level to level. You can't get complacent here, and that's partly because of the insidiously low ammo count. You're only ever dealing with an ammo supply of like 10 bullets, 5 shotgun shells. It really forces you to be judicious with how you're spending it. Always opting for stealth, if possible, if only to pick off 1 or 2 enemies before shit just hits the fan, and it will. So the stealth is serviceable, and it feels partly by design. You're not really intended to clear entire areas by sneaking around. Sebastian moves like a snail, and the camera work can get wonky around corners and blind spots, and the enemies have a questionable awareness about them, sometimes spotting me from miles away and other times missing me by miles. Most of the time you can lose these guys if you're caught, but it's not super viable to dip back into the shadows or find a hiding space and then go back to sneaking. Usually when you're caught, you're grateful if you got 1 or 2 of these guys down and then you just start blasting. And the encounter design here changes so much from level to level that it isn't always predispositioned to stealth. Funny enough, it's a little deceptive because the first big level of the game sees you sneaking around this rural village in the dark, dodging traps and picking off lone enemies to avoid alerting this whole place, leading to this great conclusion where you're chased around by the token chainsaw-wielding guy. But then you go on a fairly long stretch of linear levels where that level of freedom is hard to come by. It mixes it up a lot, but we're generally talking about pretty linear levels here with abrupt pacing changes, and those pacing changes tied together in the greater story of the game. There's a couple DLCs added to the game that lean full into stealth, only allowing for sneak attacks and avoiding enemies. It works and it doesn't. They stripped back the environments a lot and only throw 1 or 2 enemies at you at a time to get around, so it doesn't feel that bad. It's like they knew the limitations here and dialed it back, which is good. You'll play these DLCs mostly for the story, not for the gameplay, though they do feature arguably the scariest monster in the game. They're slower paced, and since they run parallel to the base game, they're much more focused on explaining that story rather than telling its own, though we do get some good character development from Julie, the protagonist in the DLC, which matters on a bigger level and in the second game. I like these levels. It feels like it rounds out the gameplay nicely with some dedicated stealth segments, long enough to be tense, but not too long to get boring. They're good. And then there's this other DLC, the Keeper DLC. This one is just goofy and worth ignoring almost entirely. You step into the big boots of one of the game's enemies, trapped in the same situation as Sebastian and company, searching for your missing daughter. You find her by eradicating a series of enemies in these little boss battles. You collect coins and do some small level ups as you bludgeon your way through a couple levels. You could disregard this entire thing unless you're really interested in the lore, of which there's a little bit here. You can learn some background stuff on how the entire conceit of the game works, but it's not mandatory. I don't know, you can probably just ignore this. Okay, so in between all the fighting and scavenging, you'll be collecting this green gel, which is your upgrade currency. You have a save room of sorts where you can teleport to, save, and level up. Sebastian has a suite of abilities, as well as stats attached to each of his weapons. You've got your base ammo stock and health, efficiency of healing items, and so on. And then you've got the sprint time. Oh God, the sprint time. Sebastian can barely run at all. At base, you can sprint for like 3 seconds before you're completely out of stamina. And it's not just that you have to manage that meter. When you get low, not out, but low, you already begin to move slower. It's insanely punishing. The first thing I upgraded in the game was sprint time. Like, you're going to need to run. You're often going to need to relocate during a fight, and you simply just don't have the juice to do it without any of these upgrades. If you tried the Evil Within and it feels bad to play, it's because of the sprint time. Once you pump a few levels into this, you can sprint for around 10 seconds, which is plenty, but at the base level, it'll be the cause of like most of your deaths. If you want to lean more into stealthing around and maybe laying traps or taking advantage of your environment, you absolutely need to invest in this. If you're playing on anything above easy, you absolutely need to invest in this. Outside of sprint, it's sort of dealer's choice. If you play like me, you hoard every little bullet and nothing feels worse than leaving ammo on the ground, so I always opted for increasing my ammo supply. Then I focused on crit chance for the revolver. It's the weapon you'll probably use most in the game, and getting that bad boy up to 50% chance to explode a dude's head per hit is pretty wild. But you can't go wrong with raw damage or upping the accuracy, as it feels like sometimes even when my reticle is dead on, I still missed shots. At baseline, the shotgun feels pretty weak outside of landing a specific headshot, so it might be worth investing in there too. The bolts also get extra powerful, so you can't go wrong beefing them up. You're not going to max out Sebastian on your first playthrough, so pick something you like and stick with it, but also don't leave anything completely unupgraded. Most of the stuff is pretty useful. I guess the only thing I never toyed with was the melee damage, because look, if I'm resorting to melee to fight these guys, I've already lost. So you do the upgrading in this little safe haven that you regularly come back to, and I like this space a lot. It's staffed by this weird, nearly catatonic nurse who, while she's never exactly a comforting presence, is always nice coming back after having braved the nightmarish shit out there in the other place. I sort of wish there was a little more to do here aside from level up and use these keys that you find to open some lockers that contain random ammo, health, or upgrade gel. It's a big space, but it's mostly empty. It's a callback to the save rooms of old, right? Sure. And I like it for that moment to breathe. But I don't know, I guess I'd have liked maybe 1 or 2 more systems to engage with while I'm in here, right? Maybe some inventory management or another character to interact with or something. I don't know, it's fine, it's good. If nothing else, it's a nice reprieve from the enemies, of which there are many. So in this monster mash, you've got a cool lineup of the standard stock zombie dudes, right? Unarmed or wielding crude weaponry or sometimes brandishing guns and having weirdly high accuracy too. They like to eat people, but they're not exactly zombies as you might expect. They seem to have some level of intelligence, but then they also walk into traps. They're cool, fodder enemies, but you can't ignore them because they'll gang up on you and eat your lunch quick if you don't manage them. You can go for the headshot and take them down quick, or pump bullets into them in a pinch, knock them down and light them up with a match, or go for the sneak attack. You have a lot of options with these guys, and they'll make up like 80% of what you fight in the game. Some variants here in a heavy version or an invisible version or a white masked version that can stop bullets for some reason. They might show up to the party with pipe bombs or Molotovs or man machine guns or trigger traps. They're pretty fun and they always get up to some shenanigans. They keep you on your toes despite being such a common enemy. I just try to pace around these guys and go for the headshots. You've got bigger threats that require more firepower. Later on, you'll find these towering amalgamation enemies, which are a treat. They're fast with long reach and demand that you keep your distance when fighting. They don't give you a lot of options with these guys, just blast away and hope that you have the reserves to do so. It's also not too uncommon in this game to fight bosses, like the long-legged black-haired spider girl who I'm sure you've seen and who's just absolutely terrifying. You're never more aware of Sebastian's lack of athleticism than when you're fighting her. She'll climb out of the ground and close the distance before you can even kick to a run. There's a mechanic for her of burning her up with traps, but if you're like me, you hoard every single bullet, and I was able to, in an extremely wasteful manner, just ignore that and just shoot her to death. It cost me all my ammo, and it was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. There's also this game's stalking enemy, the Keeper. He's a butcher with a metal safe on his head. I love this guy. He's monstrous, but he's determined and human enough to lay traps and pursue you tactfully and intentionally. He's not a zombie thing like the other guys. He's more than that. He's intimidating and relentless. If you kill him, he just comes back, born out of another little safe in the room. He drops a lot of that green gel though, so it might be worth taking him down just a couple times before moving on. When he shows up, there's this weird shuddering effect on the screen. It's disorienting and it makes it hard to locate exactly where he is. It's great, very, very nice. There's others too, like a big dog boss that skulks around in the bushes and a big gray amalgamation of bodies. They're fun, they're always a good time. They do drop the ball right at the end though with this weird squid creature that slinks around the sewers and spits out these little worms. You just chase it up to these pipes and then knock it down while it's spawning the babies. It's not very exciting, and it's a low point of the game in the obligatory sewer level, which is probably the weakest stretch of the entire experience. It's right at the very end too. But yeah, there's a lot of bosses and a lot of intense encounters here. While not super heavy on enemy variety, they all have a nice little role to play and they fit well into the levels. It's good. So you'll be experiencing these guys pretty rapidly too, because there's not a lot of downtime in this game. You're shuffled from one encounter to the next pretty quickly, and there aren't really a lot of throwaway segments here. It's one big set piece after the other, and it's pretty impressive. You might be defending your team from a horde of enemies, then rushing to defuse a trap or sneaking around a mansion solving puzzles while avoiding a really fucking annoying instant kill enemy. The game is always asking something of you. It's never really giving you time to sit and come up with your own plan or slowly pick through a level. It really wants to push you forward at all times. One level sees you taking out snipers from afar while keeping pressure off of Joseph, and the instant that's done, you're locked into a 1v1 with the chainsaw guy. No time to catch your breath. And it's in levels like this where you really need that sprint time. Jesus Christ. The pace is fast and the intensity is high like 90% of the time. That's helped with how rapidly these areas change. Sometimes you're literally ripped out of one place and chucked into another. You start off in Beacon Mental Hospital, or at least some weird, twisted, Saw-inspired nightmare version of it. You'll spend a lot of time in this game in some variation of mental ward, prison world, all flickering lights and cruel machinery. To call these places oppressive would be an understatement. No windows, just harsh emergency lighting, broken tile and maze-like hallways, and they're littered with traps. Some mundane, like tripwires or mines, right? And some extravagant, like giant metal meat grinders. There's a sort of gleeful villainy to these areas. They really leaned into this style, and to their credit, they commit to it. Everything is wrapped in barbed wire, and there's what look to be the bloody remnants of cruel science experiments all over if you're not outright standing in a torture chamber, that is. Before the environments start to break down and turn really cerebral, everything feels like some sort of horrific human processing machine. You're spat into this place to be chewed up or killed or made into something else entirely. It's completely indifferent to you being there and wants to just slaughter you and move on to the next guy. It's great. Yeah, I like it. There's a point a few chapters into the game where you finally escape the hospital environment and step out into a warm, coastal evening, and oh my god, it's a wonderful moment. Up until then, it's been all abandoned hallways and endless traps, vicious monsters and never-ending darkness, right? And then suddenly you emerge to this serene, wide open vista, the whole hillside bathed in cool, comforting evening light with the sounds of gulls and water brushing on the rocks. You realize how tense your shoulders have been, right? You finally have a moment to breathe. It's an incredible moment in the game, and it's all brought together just a few feet forward when you find a corpse hanging in a ruined hut, reminding you that, yeah, the world is still not right. You'll spend some time outside too, along this little coastline and in the ruins of a village where you're accompanied by your fellow detective Joseph, in one of the few segments of the game where you have a companion. It's fine, they're usually self-sufficient enough and they can fight and move around, and if they do get down, you just have to run over and pick them back up. Not exactly a burden, but not super useful either. It's not too long before you're back into that suffocating darkness of old factories, mansions, and nondescript concrete prisons. But then again later, you'll find yourself in an endless field of golden sunflowers cast in evening light with a stark, dark barn squat in the middle of all of them. It's simultaneously peaceful and ominous, a reprieve from the claustrophobic hallways and the twisted buildings that you've been exploring. It's a highlight of the game, just how visually striking it is. But then later you have one of the weaker levels right at the very end of the game. It's just a sewer level, like through and through, nothing exciting here. Just tunnels and old pipes and levers that move things around. It's a real shame that you'd go through so many perfectly evil locales only to end in a sewer that feels like it's inherited none of that. Like, most of the levels here aren't super unique, but they're nightmarish enough to not feel bland. And that's where the sewers just missed the mark. Overall, the journey that you go on is varied and breakneck. You go from place to place pretty quickly. The game is broken up into chapters, and each one feels pretty distinct from one another. There's no backtracking here or really puzzles to solve. Just go forward. There's a pretty good escalation as the game goes on, starting off in a way that you think maybe this is just some sort of messed up dream or time-jumping nonsense, and ending with the entire world folding in on itself. In the DLCs, you explore much of the same environments, with one seeing you navigate a powered-down industrial office building and the other just retreading old ground. The presentation of the levels is top-notch. Careful, eerie lighting or striking vistas. It all goes back to that big-budget cinematic quality that Evil Within has. It's good stuff. But there is a good explanation to all of this, so let's talk about the story. The story here is pieced out through notes and visions of characters talking, brief dialogue among our heroes, though that's mostly just them trying to parse out what's happening to them in the moment. And for our cast of characters, they're okay. On the front end, they can feel a little bland and underdeveloped, but on the back end, they kind of come into focus a little more, with some interesting history being discussed and handled in a way that I find kind of surprising. Like, in the moment, Sebastian is a boring straight man, right? Hard-boiled detective who doesn't really bring any personality to the table. He reacts stoically and decisively, and I can appreciate that. But on the back end, you get a bigger picture of him as a washed-up detective, mourning the death of his daughter and the disappearance of his wife, and losing faith in his job. There's a surprisingly well-written moment where Joseph mentions Sebastian's alcoholism, and Sebastian's response is really jaded and cold.
We can't all be perfect. It never affected my work. But hey, you read the IA report.
You know I didn't report you because I was worried about your work, Sebastian.
What else is there?
I like this. It's mentioned only a couple of times, and it's not very meaningful to the story, but it's a nice, sorrowful character moment, and it highlights Sebastian's resignation in recent years. They didn't have to add this, but they did. But through the rest of the game, he's an unflappable strongman, right? Even in most of his interactions with other characters, he doesn't have anything interesting to say. With how much insane shit is going on, you'd think he'd have something interesting to add other than the occasional cursing under his breath.
I dropped my glasses back there.
Fuck.
He's okay. There's some depth to him, even if the game doesn't do a great job of painting that picture. I wouldn't have minded a little more out of him in the moment, but the developers spend some time fleshing him out through his backstory, and he gets an overhaul in the second game. In Julie's DLC, we see even more of him, and that's cool. And speaking of Julie, she's great. You see next to nothing of her in the base game, but that's made up for her time in the DLC. She's a cool character, a ne'er-do-well street kid locked in a neglectful home. She's swooped up by a big bag, shadowy group to act as their agent for the main going on the game. She's sneaky and stealthy and closed off, trained from a self-sufficient past and a mistrust of others. So she infiltrates Sebastian's police unit, and she's recruited not for money or power, but for safety and stability. There's a nice moment where she's amazed by the housing that's provided to her from this big shadowy group, and that's all she cares about. She's not evil or really even into what's being asked of her. She's a survivalist and sees it as an opportunity. She's pretty determined, but that's only until she sees the consequence of her actions and starts having misgivings about her work. She cares for her team and regrets that they're being sucked into all this stuff that's going on around them.
Sebastian. He and Joseph weren't supposed to be involved. It shouldn't have happened like this.
She's cool and probably the character highlight of the game. Then there's Joseph. He's fine. He's straightforward like Sebastian and spends most of his time feeling sick and going in and out of being possessed. He's whatever and waved away pretty quickly. In the past, he reported Sebastian's drinking and conspiracies about his family's disappearance to internal affairs, ultimately in an attempt to help him, right? But nothing really comes of it. He seems like a good dude. So the organization that Julie works for is called Mobius. They're your standard shadowy group pulling the strings behind the scenes and working on cruel sciences. They don't go too much into exactly what Mobius was doing before the events of Evil Within, but they're the main perpetrators of the events of the game. They want to control the world, shape it in their image. I don't know, they're kind of bland. They run in the background of the main game, but take a shining spotlight in the DLC. You only see one or two references to them, leaving the sole antagonist role to that of Ruben Victoriano. He's the architect of the madness that Sebastian and company get swooped up in. He's a good antagonist too. He's both off in the background trying to achieve his goals, but he also shows up frequently enough to derail whatever Sebastian is getting up to. He's a young genius and the son of a wealthy and influential family who has a questionably close relationship to his sister, Laura. This is mentioned a couple of times, but no concrete information is given about the relationship or really his sister at all. Ruben has an interest in medical science that bordered on cruelty from a young age. He began experimenting on animals as a young boy and is quickly discovered by one doctor, Marcelo Jimenez. And Marcelo is a head doctor at Beacon Mental Hospital, of which the Victoriano family is a substantial patron of. So separately from Beacon, the Victorianos settled in amongst this rural farming village and quickly swallowed up much of their land, as rich people do, right? Outraged by this, one day the villagers retaliated by burning down one of the barns belonging to the Victorianos. At the time, Ruben and Laura were inside. They were just playing though, they were kids, it was nothing weird. Laura manages to help Ruben escape, but succumbs to the flames herself, and Ruben is severely disfigured and mentally ravaged by this event. This would be the thing that sets Ruben over the edge. He spends much of his life agonizing over this, and while we don't see much of Laura after, obviously she's dead, but she does make an appearance within STEM as this giant black-haired spider girl. So little is known about the elder Victorianos, but they seemingly took great shame in this event and locked Ruben in the basement of their manor for years. It's not clear if this was simply because of his appearance that made them do this, or if they were fearful of his sort of now crazed genius. Either way, Ruben escapes and murders them. And what little sort of moral grasp that Ruben had on his life was ripped away with the death of his sister and the subsequent abuse by his parents. He would hide their deaths and live in their estate alone, continuing his experiments until one day Marcelo comes by as the endowments to Beacon Mental Hospital have mysteriously stopped, right? He was checking up on him. He's appalled at what's become of Ruben, but he's simultaneously impressed by his research and medical experiments. Marcelo is kind of a sleazebag. Not really, he's just a sleazebag. It's made very clear. He promises Ruben human test subjects from Beacon Mental Hospital in exchange for continued funding. These guys that he experiments on will later be subjected to STEM and make up the bulk of the enemies that you fight in-game, okay? Marcelo will slink around much of the story, doing his best to stay relevant while stealing power and kind of lying his way to the top. He'll work with you in the moment and then stab you in the back. I like him. He's fun. Unreliable, secondary antagonist, a real scumbag. Okay, STEM. So Ruben is working on this thing. This is the axle of which the entirety of the game turns. STEM is this thing that people are directly hooked up to and put into a catatonic state so they can share in each other's consciousness. Think of it like if you closed your eyes, you'd share this blank canvas with other people around you that you could then imprint your will on. You can live physically here, experience your dreams, your wants, your memories and fears, right? The physical space that you inhabit within STEM is all informed by that stuff, what's going on in your head. Essentially, it's another little universe that you can live in of your own making. It's a dreamlike place that's molded by the psychology of those who are in it. If you have a dominant personality or, say, a psychopath, they will dominate that space and create a twisted hellscape like we see in game, right? It's a reflection of what's going on inside. You can probably guess what happened here. There's a surprising amount of depth to the world building on this thing, most of which is found in the DLC. It's a cool system. The goal of this thing was for Ruben to go back and be with his sister and live in a time and a place before all this tragedy befell him, right? If he can go back and see Laura, go back to when they were kids, that would fix everything for him, right? It's really weird. The problem is that this plan was flawed from the start, as Ruben has always been a little bit of a psycho. If you create this space that can be controlled by a dominant personality, Ruben's would have always been ruinous and horrific, and that's what's always been inside of him. He's always been motivated by progress and cruelty with a disregard for the well-being of others, aside from his sister. He finds later through his experiments at Beacon that human suffering kind of produces this psychic energy, and it creates this sort of material that's needed to sustain a kind of stable world within STEM. It's a really badly designed system from the start, but I guess that's what you get from a dude like Ruben. It's hard to say where the line is between Ruben wanting to be with his sister in a nice little dream world and his desire to punish people indiscriminately. He's a bad dude. You find little notes and conversations about STEM's progress, and Ruben grows increasingly vicious and determined, haunted by visions of his sister and feeling a sort of righteous ownership over this whole thing and seeing it to fruition. Somewhere along the line of Marcelo providing patience and resources to Ruben, Marcelo, being the sneaky snake that he is, publishes some of Ruben's writings on STEM, taking ownership of it. Ruben freaks out, and this is where things start to deteriorate between them. And this is where Mobius gets involved. They see Marcelo's published work of Ruben's invention, and they see STEM as the ticket to their big bad guy world domineering goals or whatever. They swoop in. They get involved with Marcelo, thinking he's the big brain behind it all. Like I said, Marcelo is kind of a cockroach, as he's power hungry but a coward who consistently tries to settle up next to those who are doing the actual work and get a piece of that pie. He eventually loops in Ruben, but Mobius, being the cold, calculating group that they are, have very, very little capacity to deal with such a wild card. They sort of give him one single chance not to fuck up, and then he immediately fucks up. Ruben makes some changes to STEM so that only his brain is attuned to it. Essentially, it can't run without Ruben's direct involvement. Mobius basically says, you shouldn't have done that, and they kill Ruben, slotting his brain into the system like a battery to run it in perpetuity without Ruben being a little crazy killer guy and causing all these problems. And I love this. It's so real to me. They would never entertain, this big shadowy group would never entertain someone like Ruben, and they don't. They take him as a resource and they discard him. It's great. Even better, after slotting his brain into the system, they start calling him Ruvik instead of Ruben. A nice little dehumanization of an antagonist who, to Mobius, isn't really anything at all. He's just a brain in a jar, and his renaming is just a naming convention that they use to keep inventory. I like it, and I like its effect. It's a nice little added obscuring layer to the story, piecing out who Ruben versus Ruvik is throughout the game as you hear both names used kind of interchangeably. But at this point in the story onward, he's Ruvik. Okay, cool, problem solved, Ruben's dead, right? Not really. It turns out using a psychopath's brain as a battery for this thing sort of infects that world with lingering residual power. And like we learned already, dominant personalities have more brain power to influence that space. Mobius realizes this and needs to get control of the system as Ruben is just sort of frolicking around there in all of his murderous evil. In a way, Ruvik sort of got what he wanted, right? To live in this perpetual dream world with his sister and all of their memories of the past. But he's too far gone, he's literally dead at the time that it happened, and it's all nightmarish, and maybe it would have always been that way, right? He's crazy. Anyway, Mobius has this poor autistic kid named Leslie that they think they can fix this whole Ruben problem with. Leslie has the same sort of collective trauma that Ruben had, and combined with his mental disposition, they think he can attune to the system in the same way that Ruvik's brain was able to attune to the system. It's sort of synced up in a way. They hope to put him in there and then get him to the source and have him take control of STEM. Yeah, I mean, sure, I don't love the whole your mental illness is the key kind of trope. I think it's lame, but it's whatever. At least it's interesting here, and Leslie is definitely painted as a victim and not a bad guy. Somewhere along the lines of STEM being built, Ruben created a wireless version of STEM that people can sync up to remotely, which is how our gang of cops gets in there at the beginning, and that's pretty much where the game starts. Mobius sends Kidman in with the team as an agent to ensure Leslie gets connected to the main STEM thing, and that's when it all goes off rails. Sebastian and Joseph are viewed as incidental and to be ignored, and boy, that would come back to bite them. Sebastian is sturdy and rugged and equipped enough to fight his way through this nightmare, brushing up against Leslie and Marcelo and Ruben, trying to piece together the story himself, but he never really does. He learns enough that Ruben is behind this and his best chance of getting out is by stopping him, but that's kind of it. It's one of those games that story-wise, it's much better on the second playthrough as you can finally make sense of all these dreamscapes that you fight through. Like, you learn that the religious village area that you go through is actually from Kidman's memories, or that the torture chambers and spinning blade traps come from the mind of another serial killer who was slotted into the machine as fodder. It's really good. It gives you a reason to play again and doesn't beat you over the head with constant exposition and explaining every detail by the end of the game. The bulk of the game is spent chasing Leslie, though you don't really know why, trying to catch up with your team and trying to take down Ruben. It's interesting that while we see stuff from Kidman's past, we don't really get anything from Sebastian or Joseph, save for a couple of Sebastian's journals that provide some backstory. I guess maybe at the point that they go in, Ruben's brain is feral enough that it's suppressing any additional influence. I don't know. So Sebastian heads towards this ever-present silhouette of Beacon Mental Hospital in the distance, feeling drawn by its light. That's where Ruvik's brain is. The team coalesces in the end, but the manifestation of Ruvik merges with Leslie, growing even more powerful. It seems to have had the opposite effect of what Mobius wanted. Sebastian fights him and seemingly wins, smashing Ruvik's brain in a fucking fantastic final moment. But the merging of Leslie and Ruvik allowed him to transplant his consciousness into Leslie's body, and then he's seen walking out of Beacon off to do nefarious things that we will never see. Julie and Sebastian escape, with Julie ensuring Sebastian isn't terminated by Mobius. She's pretty shaken by the end of the story, with her rejecting the control that Mobius was trying to exert over her. But at the time she's unplugging Sebastian from STEM, she knows there's really no good way for them to fight now. She's trapped by them, just as she was trapped by her hard life before joining up with them. It's a nice full circle moment for her. In Julie's DLC, you get a glimpse of Myra, Sebastian's missing wife, seemingly now an exec within Mobius. She pays literally no mind to Sebastian's condition and quickly moves on. Only a second is spent on this scene, but it's really interesting and ties the Castellanos family into the plot in a bigger way. The ending is bleak and open, leaving Sebastian lost and even further convinced of the conspiracies around his wife and daughter's disappearance. Joseph is fucking dead or something. I don't know. They don't really give a shit about him. Rubik's free and Julie is still an undercover Mobius agent, deeper now than ever before. They don't really win. So yeah, I like The Evil Within. The whole game is wrapped up in the cinematic, big budget blockbuster package. It took me around 13 hours to beat it, and not really any of that time is wasted. It's a cerebral nightmare from hour one, and it does not let up. The story is framed in such a way that you're always guessing, if only because the locales and scenarios change so frequently. It can be overwhelming and a little nonsensical in the moment, and maybe that's not your thing, but for me, I like that it kept me guessing and really commits to this idea of an ever-changing, nightmarish dream world. It's wild and brutal, and the gameplay is honed in so that you're always scavenging for supplies and sweating over the last 3 bullets that you have to spend. We don't get a lot of horror games like this anymore, and there's something to be said about talented devs backed by big budgets going after a story like this. There was a clear vision going on here, and I think they executed on it really well. The sequel, which I'll talk about in another video, doubled down on all of this, and I'm excited to get to it. There's still more to Sebastian's story, but even if you were to stop here, Evil Within 1 tied in with all its DLC is more than a worthwhile trip.